Hi, I'm Old Norse Specialist Jackson Crawford. In this video on my Patreon supported channel dealing with questions of Old Norse language and mythology, I'm going to talk about mistletoe in Norse mythology. Where it comes up, what it means in as much as it means something, and pointedly what it doesn't mean, or we can't say for sure it means. So it was my assistant Stella who told me that in the typical way it seems, as the Christmas season approaches, I always see a couple videos start to get a little bit more attention. I have a video from a few years ago about the pre-Christian Norse holiday of Yule or Yule. That starts getting more attention in December. My unpopular video about how the myth of Santa Claus isn't based on Odin starts getting some views around now. It's also not based on Thor, by the way, another variation of that I've seen recently. I have other Christmas videos that definitely less popular, like my original Christmas Carol from a couple years ago. But one question I hadn't dealt with that people were asking about is mistletoe. Let me give you a sample of what the internet will tell you in the form of the, by the internet standards, nearly reputable source, Wikipedia, which mentions that, of course, in Norse myth, at least the Icelandic version recorded in the Eddas, Loki uses mistletoe to create a weapon that he gives to the blind god Hother, which Hother then kills his brother Balder with. And then according to Wikipedia, as of December 2021, quote, some versions of the story have mistletoe becoming a symbol of peace and friendship to compensate for its part in the murder, off quote. Some versions of the story, there's two, right? Look, neither one mentions this. And when I say there's two, I mean there's two that mention mistletoe in connection with Baldur's death. There's actually more versions of the story of Baldur's death. I'm still pretty happy with the video from 2018 that I did in the San Juans about the death of Baldur and the various versions of that story. So see that for the really different versions, like Saxo's Danish version. But in the two places that mention mistletoe in connection with Baldur's death, we've got the Prose Edda, which is the pretty comprehensive account of Baldur's death. This is one people are typically thinking about, where Snorri talks about how, you know, many people watching this will be familiar with this. Otherwise, check out the Death of Baldur video. But Frigg tells Loki that there is a particular plant that was too young to swear the oath not to harm Baldur. She says it in some really alliterating language that makes it sound like it's probably from a lost poem. She says, Vex vedar teinungur ein fyrir vestan Valhall, så Mystilstein kalaður, så þótti mér ungur at krefja eðsins. A young shoot of a tree grows west of Valhalla. It is called mistletoe. It seemed young to me to ask to swear an oath. Okay, so there we have mistletoe. The word mistletoe in Old Norse, Mystilstein, occurs, I think, 2 more times in the Prose Edda, where we have Loki go and grab some and make the weapon with it. I don't have that text right in front of me right now, but I believe the weapon is called Wandr, wand stick in Snorri's text. Many people read that as spear, although it really doesn't say specifically spear there. And then the third place where Hother throws it at Baldur. So it doesn't come up that much. It certainly doesn't come up as some kind of a symbol of peace or friendship or whatever. The other place in the Eddas where this is mentioned is in the Poetic Edda, the poem Völuspá, stanza 31 in the Codex Regius manuscript version of that poem. We see Exo Baldri, blóðgum Tibur, Óðins barni, Urlog folgen, stóðum vaxen, volum herri, mjór og mjókvagar Mystilstein. I saw Baldur, the bloody god, son of Odin, hidden fates. Really, what she's saying is, I see hidden fates for Baldur, a bloody god Odin's son. There stood, grown high over the plains, soft and very fair mistletoe. Now, soft, fair might apply to mistletoe pretty well. Mistletoe itself is a parasitic plant, so it wouldn't grow high above the plains this way. Merrill Kaplan at Ohio State University had an idea maybe about 10 years ago that I thought was pretty interesting, that suggested that maybe we've lost a story, something like how mistletoe had once been a freestanding tree, maybe even a very tall tree, and that its punishment for its role in Baldur's death was to be made into the little parasitic plant that we call mistletoe now. I think that's a really cool idea. It's not falsifiable or provable, but it's a really, well, I guess you could find some lost manuscript that has a story like that. But I think it's a really neat idea and might explain this, very high above the plain description. Although mistletoe can grow very high up in trees too, so that's not necessarily such a huge stretch. But that's where you've got mistletoe, right? It's nothing about this symbol of peace and friendship, according to whoever on Wikipedia. Remember, anyone can edit Wikipedia. Or any of this stuff about Frigg declaring mistletoe a symbol of peace, or the berries being Frigg's tears, or anything like that. None of that is there in our Old Norse sources, and I don't know where people are getting that when they talk about it online and in popular books, as I'm so often not sure where ultimately these ideas come from, except that they seem to make sense to somebody, maybe starting with Jakob Grimm. Let me give you a word from my friends and partners Grimfrost real quick here, and I'll come back and talk a little bit more about where mistletoe comes up in Old Norse. So the word mistletoe is interesting. Notice that English mistletoe and Old Norse Mystilstein are both three-syllable words that look fairly similar to one another. That tain part in Old Norse mistletoe is the same thing you're seeing in the word Frigg used for mistletoe, vidar teinungur. Tain is like shoot, right? Like a sprig of a plant, something like that. Maybe a bough. At any rate, it's a part of a growing plant. So mistletoe, and toe is a worn down form of the same word in English, is like, it's almost like kind of a redundancy. It's like a mistletoe plant, mistletoe shoot, mistletoe sprig, something like that. The simplex word is still used in German, where the plant is called, I think it's feminine in German, die Mistel. It's masculine in Old Norse, mistel. The simplex word mistel is found in Old Norse, although in more limited context. Like in English, it's that whole compound, mistletoe, mistiltein, that you'll more often see. And what's really interesting with that simplex mistel is where you see it in two, as far as I know about them, two runic inscriptions from the Viking Age, and of course the younger Futhark, because the elder Futhark was long forgotten, many centuries at this point, as I've talked about time and time again on many videos. We see some interesting formula. So the most famous example of stone of this kind is Östergötland 181, ÖG 181 in the typical classification system used by rune data, etc. This is the Ledberg stone from Sweden. Otherwise, a pretty standard memorial stone put up by a son named Bissi to his father Thorgelter. It has a portion next to a wolf biting a man's legs. This has been read in various contexts as possibly a representation of some part of the Ragnarok story, although notably there is a cross on the stone, and the stone does date from after the conversion. But we read, I'll read this as if it's the Roman alphabet, Thorn MK III SSS TTT IIILLL, which reads, if you take the first letter in each one of those groups of three, as thistil, mistil, kistil. Three rhyming words that translate to thistle, mistletoe, and then something like casket, box. Now, this very same trio of rhyming words is written in the exact same way on another memorial stone. This is Denmark 239, DR 239, the Gølev stone. Another memorial stone, this one for the very interestingly named Othenkar. And it has a complete younger Futhark rune alphabet, and then that same Thistil, Mistil, Kistil written the same way as on the Ledberry stone. Now, what does that mean? Well, I don't have some kind of guidebook to weird ways people write things in runes. Remember that the inscriptions that we have are the inscriptions we have, and they don't come with explanatory indexes or commentary. It is possible that these three rhyming words are associated with one another as some kind of a magical formula. I would certainly not throw that away. It could have some kind of other significance that we just can't guess at. What do thistle, mistletoe, and a box have in common with one another? I certainly can't begin to guess. But that's very, very interesting. We also see a sword, a very notable sword named Mistletoe, Mystilstein, in Hrómundar saga Gripssonar, where we have a pretty little known saga, the Fornaldir saga genre, the mythical heroic sagas, the genre kind of like the saga of the Volsungs or the saga of Herborn Heiðrik, which I've translated, of course. In this saga, a memorable scene, Hrómundur, our hero, wrestles a draugr, an undead man, in his burial mound, and takes his sword that he had won 104 og 20 Holmgangr with. So he had won either 124 or 144, depending on if that's old style 100 or new style 100, duels with this sword in his life. Now Hrómundur will take it and have his own long, storied, heroic career with the sword, and he will later lose it, actually, in a fight on some ice. It will fall into the water, and later it will be found by a fisherman having been eaten by a pikefish. That's kind of a weird little detail about that sword. This is, so far as I can detect, where mistletoe comes up in Old Norse mythology, broadly construed. And of course, that's being pretty generous with defining mythology by throwing these runestones in. I do not see anything there to suggest that this is some kind of a symbol of peace or friendship or something like that. And I was talking with, drop another name here, my good friend Shay, actually earlier today, about our obsession today with things being symbols of other things, especially symbols of abstract concepts. I cannot count how many times a week people want to know, what is the Norse symbol for strength, or symbol for wisdom, or symbol for Odin? Well, they might have had, shorthand symbols for these things, but we don't have them recorded, and it's possible that they just didn't have shorthand symbols like that. Remember that the runes are fundamentally letters in an alphabet. They stand for sounds. They do have names, and they might represent their names in an inscription, but that doesn't make them symbols of some kind of abstract quality necessarily. We have no evidence for their use that way in the Viking Age or the medieval period. We do have evidence of the use that way in the early modern period. But how does that help the people who want to know, the pre-Christian meanings of these things? I suggest that today we live in a symbol-obsessed world, a world where everyone wants a symbolic tattoo, wants to use the right symbolic hashtags or whatever. In a lot of ways, this is in fact that dreaded Christian influence that people are always so worried about in Norse myth, where it is in fact Christianity that has a lot of symbols for things, a lot of abstract concepts that it emphasizes, different ones than people associate with the pre-Christian Norse for sure, charity, modesty, humility, that kind of thing. But it is Christianity that I think has implanted in the modern, I'll say post-Christian world, a predilection to look for and use symbols, and especially to associate them with abstract virtues. So for example, of course, in Christianity, the fish standing for Jesus, the lamb standing for Jesus or peace, the cross standing for Jesus, this kind of thing, where we don't necessarily know that the pre-Christian Norse religion use symbols that way, and if they did, if they're even recoverable, because again, we don't have indexes of these things that survive. What survive are some runic inscriptions, which are basically memorial stones. So-and-so died, and this is my memorial to him. Or we have stories about the gods and the Eddas, and somewhat in sagas like the Saga of the Volsungs, that tell us really nothing about what it means to be practicing adherent of this old faith. So mistletoe perhaps could have had some kind of symbolic virtues for the Norse. I wouldn't completely write off the possibility. I would basically write off the possibility that we can know what that is, and I would definitely write off the possibility that 19th, 20th, 21st century mystics can intuit what it means by, from what I can tell, is basically free association. All right. Well, thank you, Stella, Shay, two people mentioned in this video. Thank you to my Patreon supporters for continuing to make these videos possible. And from beautiful, windy, but still not very wintry Colorado, I'm wishing you all the best.